Well, it's 6:30 according to the town hall clock, so it's anyone's guess what time it really is. But we'll start the meeting. First of all, this meeting will be webcast for the thousands of people who are anticipating this exciting meeting of Democracy and General Purposes Committee. But is anyone else likely to be recording this meeting? I ask not to stop you, but simply to no. No, I take that as a no. There is no fire drill, as far as I know, organised this evening, so if the alarms go off, we will assume it is a genuine emergency, and Democratic Services officers will establish the situation and hopefully come back and show us the safe route out. Now, can those of us who have got mobile phones either ensure they're off or on silent mode, please? I commenced the meeting this evening. Do we have any apologies for absence? In that case...
Councillor Reardon. Councillor Reardon.
Thank you very much. Do we have any substitute members in that case?
Councillor Springett for Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, welcome. Do we have any urgent items, item 3? No? And I see an absence of visiting members, so unless there's someone online, I don't see any. No visiting members. Are there any disclosures by members and officers this evening? No? Any disclosures of lobbying? Item 7, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I intend to take the entire agenda, such as it is, in public this evening. Is that agreed? Minutes of the meeting of the 9th of September. These have been circulated. Are there any corrections to the minutes, or can I sign them in due course as an accurate record? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Question and answer session. Questions from local residents, sadly there aren't any. Questions from members to the chairman, again we haven't got any. Committee work programme, I think we may have an update to this. Mr O'Connor.
Good evening, members. I fear you may get bored of listening to me by the time we reach the end of the evening.
No,
but
not possible.
Before you are bored, I'd like to make a slight amendment, or put forward a slight amendment for the committee to consider to its work programme in relation to the community governance Grove Green item. If we commence the review in either January or March, we would not be able to conduct full and robust consultation with the residents of Grove Green and others before the election, the county elections in May. It would therefore be more appropriate to start the conduct of the review post-election. However, in order to demonstrate our commitment to the review, as stipulated previously by this committee, I propose an amendment to the work programme to bring a report in January 2025, setting out the timetable and process for the review for this committee to comment on and approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was my fault originally when this community governance review was proposed that we would actually be looking at the substantive part of it after the county council elections, for the reasons that should be obvious, that one doesn't want the important issue of the governance of Grove Green and the wider area of Boxley to be tangled up in a political, with a small or capital P, tussle and become an objective of competing issues between political parties and independents. So I think that's very sensible. Councillor Springett.
Obviously, I'm not normally on this committee. What is that article about, the Community Governance Review for Grove Green?
When we had the overall community governance, there was a body of opinion. There is, how large it is remains to be seen, that there should be a separate consultation as to whether or not there should be a separate parish for Grove Green. We did not want to delay the entire community governance review for that, so we decided to deaggregate that issue and take it forward separately. And again, we don't want to muddle it up with the county elections. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. It worked eventually. As a resident of Grove Green, I think I ought to declare an interest, but it's not quite fiduciary, and I don't propose to to go outside or do anything other than participate. But in the interest of transparency, if we're talking about this, I am a resident of Grove Green.
And I'm a member of Boxley Parish Council, as is Miss Councillor Thompson. However, I would say that, as a general observation, I've said this many times, your mic's still on, Gary. Nice moustache, by the way. Members members in general are rather too keen to declare interest. The general test is that if a member of the council doesn't have a greater interest than a general member of the community, which in this case you wouldn't have, Councillor Cook, that you don't need to declare it. So some members keep ruling themselves out of things when they don't necessarily need to. So I just made that general observation. But thank you for your transparency. Is that change to the work programme agreed? Thank you. Right, anything else on the work programme? No? In that case, we move on to reports of outside bodies. What we did, we had a little discussion about this before as to whether we should be looking at reinstating reports at annual reports. Any thoughts on that going forward, because it was raised as to whether we should reintroduce annual reports for outside bodies?
This is in relation to item 13, reports of outside bodies. Yeah. So at the moment, what we do is we tend to be reactive to members who send us reports. If something in particular happens at an outside body, sometimes members want to give us an update because something of interest has occurred, but we do not chase reports from members who sit on outside bodies currently. There is obviously a level of administration required to do that, both within the Democratic Services team and also for members to write those reports. I suspect some of them would be more meaningful than others. Is that a polite way of putting it? If we were to do that, given the breadth of work and items that would arise from different outside bodies. It's not something that I'm intending to implement, so unless the committee want to kind of instruct me to do it, I don't think it's something that there's actually a lot of value that comes from it. If there is something major that occurs, it does get reported through and dealt with either via one of these reports or through a separate report that comes forward anyway where it matters. Thank you.
No, that's what I thought you'd say, and I'm inclined to agree with it, but as it was raised, I just thought I'd check. But members do still have the facility to submit one, should they so wish, and perhaps we should remind them through the political groups that they have that facility. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. You won't be surprised to hear me testing this hypothesis. It is my habit for which I will apologise. So I agree with Ryan that we don't want to generate procedures for his office or anybody else's just for the sake of it. Chair, I think you began to indicate that members sitting on outside bodies could be reminded of and invited to submit points of relevance and interest to the council widely. I think that would be an extremely good idea. I note that the current mayor took similar advice and has raised the level of communication between himself and the deputy to let us as members know what the mayor and the deputy are up to in their excellent liaison with the wide membership of groups around the borough. Given that many of us in this chamber are now extremely new, I think that such an invitation to share relevant information can only do some good. I'm minded to avoid unnecessary paperwork, but I think that would be useful. Thank you.
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. I do take the point that democracy have got enough to do without having to chase after people. At what point, no, I'm going to put that another way. Surely at some point, we or Democratic Services write to the successful applicant and say, great stuff, you're on board, and we look forward to receiving reports from you. be it annual, quarterly, annual report, or something along those lines. And that way, you've actually asked for it, and you're let off the hook, you haven't got to chase them up. Now you're going to tell me that that's what you already do. If so, whoopee.
No, that's not quite what we already do, and I think as a number of members remain on outside bodies for a period of time, that initial contact with them to ask them to do that would probably get lost after a period of time. I mean, what we can do is, when we are forming the agenda for the Democracy General Purposes Committee, whether we do it for each one or whether we maybe do it every other meeting or maybe we just do it once every 6 months, we could email around to all councillors generally and just say, if you have got a report from an outside body, can you send it to us by this date? If it arrives with us, we'll put it on the agenda, and if it doesn't, we won't. And then we have reminded members, and yeah, just publish it if we've got it.
Thank you. I think we've done that one to death. But, oh, sorry, Councillor Jeffrey.
So I welcome that suggestion. I think it might also be useful if you could let us know who you've asked to report, so that as a committee we know that whatever person or whatever one hasn't ever responded to us is, and we can go and nudge people as well at some point, because I think it is important that we get stuff back, but I don't want to give you extra work. But just let us know who you're asking, and we'll keep an eye on our colleagues, maybe.
That's good, because we may forget. I mean, I can't remember one thing from 1 month to another, and I wouldn't be able to remember who is the right person for whichever outside body. So, yeah, go along with that as well. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey.
Right, thank you very much. That brings us on to outside body appointments, agenda item 14. Might as well start at the beginning and work our way through them.
So I really don't intend to introduce this one for very long, because we have followed the usual process for these appointments, and as you say, you've got the list there of the application forms for all the appointments. The only thing I need to do is just highlight that the South East Employers position is a substitute position.
Right, so working through these in order on the sheet. Howard, the Warden Centre, looking at this, I don't think we've got a have we a nomination? Sorry?
Sorry, Chairman, I think it would be easy if you start on page 28. You get the nomination forms that we've received, so if you work through those.
Well, I did have a point on what. I'll come back to the ones where we haven't got nominations received, because yeah. I did actually, there was a reason for starting there, but we'll come back to that in a minute if you want to do it that way. Right, Citizens Advice Bureau is the one we have a nomination from Simon Wales. Expressed a keen interest, and it clearly does overlap, their work does overlap with his cabinet portfolio to a very large extent. So are we happy to appoint Councillor Wales? Yes, of course, you can always speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I absolutely no problem with Councillor Wales. He looks eminently suitable. I mean, I admire what he's doing already, and that's the kind of quality councillor we would need. My point is, do we have to call it a Citizens Advice Bureau? They're Citizens Advice Maidstone, are they not? I meant to check it out on the website to see if it's a formal legal change, but they refer to themselves in their, well, not CV, but the description of what their requirements are. They do call themselves Citizen Advice Maidstone, and I just think it would be respectful if we follow the... But it might need checking up on, because I could be completely wrong, but...
To my knowledge, they've used both titles within...
CAB and CAN. Oh,
members, to my knowledge, they've used both titles fairly interchangeably over the last year, so I don't think they're going to be too upset. Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be an issue, whatever we call
Okay.
it. Yeah.
I don't mind being looked at as being stuffy.
So, anyway, so is that agreed in terms of, okay? Nomination, next one, Maidstone Street Pastors. Advertised this a few times. Sorry? Did I jump one? Sorry, I've jumped a page there. Sorry. I knew right. Hale Park Nature Reserve, this is normally, well, it was a South Board member, but now it's Lewes and Linton and or Tobble. As you can see, Mr. Hickson has put his name forward. He was intended to come along this evening in case you had any questions, but he's not feeling terribly well. He had a heart attack, suspected a little while ago. So he's taking it easy at the moment. So, any questions or comment? Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. It seems highly appropriate as Councillor Hickson is the local member, so I would certainly vote to recommend acceptance of his nomination. Thank you.
Moving on. Right, Maidstone Area Arts Partnership. This is a body which we've lacked a member on for a little while, I think. So that is good to see a nomination come forward, willing volunteer and all that. So we've got Grace Couch, is it Couch or Cooch? I never quite. Okay, has put her name forward, so I propose her. Is that seconded? Thank you very much. I think Dan
Chairman,
was...
may I comment, please?
Yeah,
I'm sorry
well,
to be
yeah,
a
you
pain,
can comment
but,
all you like.
You know, I've come out on a rainy night. I do think that Councillor Cooch's application, she really means it. You know, there's a lot of information in there, and I'm not just going to sort of rubber stamp this through. I'd like to just acknowledge the effort that Councillor Cooch has put into this. What I did like about her reason for applying, there is always room for improvement in the relationship between the council and local organisations, and I hope to become a useful conduit between the two. And I think that almost ought to be a motto for all these reps on the outside bodies. So I'd say well done, Councillor Cooch. Let's send her approval through.
This is clearly one of the fuller applications and more thought about ones we've had in our time. So is that agreed? I have to say my application for the next one is not particularly... Sorry? Is not particularly to the same high standard. I don't wear a dog collar, Councillor Cook, but I am actually technically allowed to. There's a Methodist, as a qualified Methodist preacher, but we don't generally dress up in quite such mufti. But were you indicating?
Yeah, I just thought I'd comment on the application itself, and obviously not quite as full as the last one. But I wondered whether you'd like us to ask you a few questions in this job interview. And if, but I'm not going to say that. I'm happy to propose it.
I just want to know when you're going to have time to do it, Councillor English. You're such a busy man.
To say I agreed to put my name forward with a certain degree of reluctance, precisely for that reason. But I do believe this is an important organisation which provides a great service to Maidstone, and given the way they're set up, they do require a borough councillor representative on the committee. So, yes, well, I shall just have to clone myself or something. But yeah, but they do need a representative, and with some reluctance, as no one else was willing, I think I have to do it.
I feel confident that you will do what you need to when you can.
Yeah. Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you very much, members. We move now to one where So you recall that we appointed the full representative to South East Employers last meeting, but we are entitled to appoint a substitute representative. We have an application from Councillor Thompson. Did anyone want to ask any questions? Now, I just want to point out for fullness that we are allowed to, despite it being saying substitute, we are allowed to send 2 people. It's just if there's a vote, but the formal issue of who the member comes in. So it's nice to have full representation. I propose Councillor Thompson, as he's gone to the trouble to apply. Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Is that agreed? Thank you very much, members. I think that brings us to the end of those people who have actually applied for things. So, what do we still have outstanding other than Howard the Warden? We got.
And I'll second that.
Well,
as someone who's always whizzing around his bicycle, I think
in
you're
terms of the
eminently
Maidstone
qualified.
Cycle Forum and the Kent Community Rail Partnership Steering Group, there is not quite such a pressing need for this council to appoint a permanent representative, because I actually chair of the Kent Downs Line section of the Kent Community Rail Partnership, and I am actually a member of it, so in extremis, and I am a member of the Kent Campaign Cycle Forum. So if we do actually need reports and feedback, that channel is available, so they're not particularly urgent. Howard the Warden is a bit more urgent because I do need to appoint someone, but the council doesn't have to, in the past, there are organisations like Cutbush and Coral where we having exhausted internal inquiries with the council has agreed to appoint members of the public in the relevant area who are interested. I would like to suggest that we do consider going down that route with Howard the Warden, because it is a very important community facility, so I would like to open this up to members of the general public to be appointed by the council if that committee is in agreement. The other one, Maidstone in Need charity, I believe it only meets about once a year to actually dish up the checks.
So the operation of relief and need charities, it varies depending on the sorts of applications and volume of applications we get in. The relief and need charity can only provide funding for someone where they've exhausted all other avenues. And actually at the moment there have been a number of other avenues available due to some of the other sources of funding that have come in from government. So its activity has been reduced somewhat recently, but that's not to say that those sources of funding would continue and its activity will continue to be at those low levels. But yes, it's not a significant commitment, because even when it's busy, it's not dealing with it's dealing with a handful of applications in any 1 year.
When I sat on it briefly about a decade ago, it met twice in a calendar year. My understanding is it does need to have a council representative on it in order to function properly, but I could be wrong about that.
I'm not sure. I'd have to check the terms of the charity itself and the charities.
Can you check that? Because if need be, we'll find someone somewhere.
So are you suggesting you'd like to open up to a non-council person if we can?
Well,
we'll check whether
can we
that's
check
possible.
that, and B, whether it can operate properly without a council nominee?
Yeah.
Please.
Chair, could I just ask who's the local ward member? Who is the local ward member for that? I don't know what the Howard the Warden Centre is. But,
Well, the local ward members have all been consulted and they've all declined. Mark Nagy's declined for very good reasons. His father, Dave, is the centre manager, who is also therefore ineligible as a local ward member to sit on the committee because he's employed by the committee. So he can't sit, and Mark has quite rightly said that he'd have a conflict of interest because they're employing his father. And so Well, Councillor Conyard has declined, and I did ask Councillor Thompson, because we did agree to extend it to the neighbouring ward, but Councillor Thompson has said that he has lots of commitments, so has declined currently. Yeah, so I would welcome it being up. There are several members of the public who may well be interested in the community area, and we have had such appointments in the past with notable success, including Cutbush and Coral, where former councillor Jennifer Fenn and former councillor Paul Oldham were both nominated by the council after they had ceased to be councillors and served for distinction in that body. So is that agreed?
Sorry, if I can just come out on page 25, where it sets out the job specification for Maidstone Relief and Need charities. It states that nominative trustees are appointed by the council for a term of 4 years and may be, but need not be, members of the council.
That's what I thought, yeah.
And the scheme for the regulation of the charity states that nominative trustees shall be persons who, through residence, occupation or employment or otherwise, have special knowledge of the former borough of Maidstone. So as long as they meet that latter commitment, but they don't have to be.
Okay, so if we could see if there's a wide, particularly any past members who might be, or aspiring future members who might be interested. So, right, thank you very much. And we've agreed. Sorry, Councillor Thompson.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification on that. Does that mean that an invitation will be invited in the same way as members put forward to the next meeting, or can it be accelerated in some fashion?
Well, we'd still have to appoint formally at the next meeting, so we can't really accelerate beyond the next meeting, but we'll obviously try and put it out as widely as possible. Obviously, all council groups will hopefully be invited to utilise their contacts. And we all have people in our wider, shall we say, organisations who are interested in participating in such activities, so and advertise it appropriately. So, right, is that agreed? Thank you very much, members. Right, moving on to the reason that everyone came this evening, which is the related alterations boundary changes update, which I know everyone has been eagerly anticipating on page 34. Mr. O'Connell.
A thriller-minute item, yeah. As part of the whole borough community governance review, where the council changed parish council boundaries, officers were given delegated authority to implement related alterations. As that process has been running for a while now, I thought it appropriate to give members a brief update. Related alterations, just as a reminder, are minor tweaks, very minor tweaks to ward and divisional boundaries, such that they align with the revised parish boundaries, and in some cases old parish boundaries. The Electoral and Boundary Review Committee at Kent County Council supported the recommendations that impact their divisional boundaries, and the ward and divisional changes proposed have been submitted to the Local Government Boundary Commission for England. That happened at the beginning of October. I had hoped that they would have had approval by the time of this meeting, but the Commission actually meets tomorrow to consider them, though I can say they are recommended to the Commission for approval by their officers. And also it's worth noting that this isn't the end of the process, with the Commission needing to make orders or amend orders that have already been made for boundaries in time for the divisional tweaks to apply at the county election in May 2025. And the ward changes would apply from May 2028, the timing of our next election. So the boundary changes only come in with the election. So we'd be running on the slightly incongruent boundaries until we get to 2028. But they are all minor in nature, and I'm hoping that they go through tomorrow. Thank you.
Much indeed. Councillor Cook.
Ryan anticipated my question, and I have an answer already. Just as an observation, I think all we can do this evening anyway is note these, and we can't do anything until we have the agreement of the Boundary Commission for England and Wales, and if they come back and say no, then we go back to we're stuffed. But if they say yes, then we're fine. And Frank, from a personal point of view, in terms of the county, my own county division, I think what's being proposed here makes eminent sense. It's in terms of that relationship and community. What you're looking at is taking 50 people from what is Chapman Avenue and the Downs and putting them into Maidstone South, from Maidstone South East. So that's why there's no objection from KCC, and as long as there's no objection from I would propose that we just note this and move on.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just thank... Oh, I beg your pardon, did you not? What are you doing? Can I just thank the officer for very clear map? I've understood it. You said the yellow bit's the actual boundary and the mauve bit's the blue bit. And I found it all very helpful. Thank you. And I understood the report. I'm ever so tempted to say, I always found the maps on the Maidstone Borough website for the Maidstone wards and parishes to be eminently clear. I have never had that experience with county council boundaries, and I do hope that there will be an opportunity with the spirit of partnership and working together and in service of all our residents, that we could provide some kind of service with KCC to help them with clarity on their boundaries and the accessibility to them. And I'd go further to suggest that in the spring edition of the Borough Insight, that excellent community newspaper that's been dropping through people's letterboxes, we could actually do a joint feature with KCC on the forthcoming county elections. As a democracy committee, I think it's highly appropriate that this committee should make such a suggestion, as we are all working in terms of the benefit of our residents, to encourage them to vote and to use the democratic rights that they have, that so many in this godforsaken world do not have. End of sermon.
Oh, well, there you go. Councillor, I said this would spark a huge amount of interest, didn't I? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I feel that I must protest the godforsaken part of the previous speech. But moving rapidly on to page 42, it seems to me that the green line in the highlighted areas does appear to pass through at least 2 properties. So notwithstanding Councillor Gooch's well-placed compliments for the clarity of the maps in general, I would like to draw attention to the fact that the green line does appear to be generating a problem that has been solved elsewhere, and I'm sure that the officer will be able to wave a magic wand over this and sort it with due speed. Thank you.
Any comment on that?
Yes, my magic wand is ready. Yeah, when the actual boundary comes in, it will be around those properties. Part of the purpose of this has actually been we've bitten the bullet, as it were. We're doing all of these different reviews, and we've come across some areas where there are just some boundaries that just cut through all sorts of properties. So we've gone to the extra length of trying to actually delineate based on postcodes and addresses and where people identify which side of, whether it's a Bearstead side or so we've drawn the line around those properties. So yes, we'll make sure it's plotted properly. Thank you.
It's not a new problem. I recall that for many years that Lone Cottage, which is the last house in East Farley, the house was in East Farley and the garden was in Topham, which caused some degree of confusion. Fortunately, the occupant was a member of both parish councils. So but Councillor Cook.
Just as a point of information, I think we've KCC had notice of a further boundary review up and coming, which is scheduled for 25-26. So once we get through the county elections this time, there will be a boundary review for all of them. So This will all be back in the melting pot at that point.
There's nothing so joyous as a big
I'll
boundary review. Well, thank you. Is that report agreed along with the additional note of thanks to the officers for their sterling work on preparing this? Thank you. So we move on to perhaps a somewhat more controversial subject: remote attendance and proxy voting at local authorities meeting, consultation response. Are you introducing this, or Angela? Oh, you are having a busy evening.
I did warn you. Right. In this document before you, given the short timescale for the response and bringing it to this meeting, I have taken the liberty of shock and horror actually expressing my own opinion on things in the consultation response. So the government have commenced a short consultation on the introduction of remote attendance at committee meetings by committee members and the possibility of introducing proxy voting for absent members. So I am entirely open to the committee's views on the response, but the main thrust of the approach that I have taken on each topic is that on remote attendance, there is a positive change, but not one that should be dictated in detail to local authorities who are best placed to determine their own circumstances and how to implement it. As such, the response suggests that constitutions should be updated and a protocol on the operation published, such that it is transparent to the public and others, but that no specific restrictions on its use should be stipulated in legislation. So bearing in mind that all the other rules and stipulations around committees and their operation and access to information, all that sort of stuff will still be in place. This affords maximum flexibility in meeting local circumstances whilst being transparent. And you can quite imagine that different authorities would have different circumstances, so not every authority would have the hybrid working that we've got available here, for example. And some communities will be more rural than others. On proxy voting, I have a rather different view. I think this is an issue that would be fraught with unintended consequences, and in the vast majority of cases, local authorities have substitution rules that address this matter sufficiently. In any event, introducing remote attendance would reduce the issue that they're trying to address even further. Therefore, the response does not support the introduction of a significant change, which would have administrative and possibly political consequences of having a member or members in the room with more than one vote available to them. Lastly, there is a question 5 that I've not answered, relating to the percentage use of remote attendance by members, because I don't really have a clear idea of what percentage of members would or would not use remote attendance should it be available. I think it would probably be on the low side. Less than 10% is probably where I'd fall down, but I would welcome the input of the committee on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. I think personally I'm in favour in general of the of remote attendance being allowed. It would be helpful for people with physical disabilities or so on. However, there is one issue. Councillor Springett will be aware of what that is. On Bearsted Parish Council we had 2 members who moved to France and persisted in arguing that that attending remotely enabled them to remain indefinitely members of the parish council, which it didn't, fortunately, at the time. But had it been the case, they could have resided indefinitely in France, been re-elected, because as sitting councillors they could be re-elected, and continued to exist indefinitely in a foreign jurisdiction, never returning physically once to possibly with the exception of having to return to sign their acceptance of office form after an election, to the UK on any occasion. There needs to be some form of safeguard that people cannot simply disappear hundreds of miles away from the area they're representing and continue using the remote access arrangements to pretend to serve their community. And under the proposals as set out by the government, that could happen. So subject to that caveat and something being done about it, or at least enabling local authorities to have the discretion to prevent it, then I am in favour of that recommendation. I'll come back to proxies later. Councillor Springett.
Thank you. I'm not in favour. If the government do bring this in, I do hope they bring it in for Parliament and the House of Lords as well. and then we'll see who does and who doesn't attend. We already have some councillors who have quite a poor attendance record, so that's going to get even worse when they can attend from a distance. I absolutely support remote attendance for those who have certain issues. Perhaps if we had a disabled councillor who had mobility issues, I can accept that. Someone who's got a sudden family emergency, I can accept that. But I think in the normal process, I think this would be, it's great in principle, but I think it would be a backward step. Of our 49 councillors, I think only 18 were here during COVID and will be aware of the issues we had at meetings. People couldn't get in, people had a poor signal, people with poor Wi-Fi couldn't use their cameras and had poor connectivity. So we did have an awful lot of issues that a lot of newer councillors will not be aware of. We had it again at JTB about a month ago. We had connection issues. So those issues are not fully resolved. I can see, full council, if we get remote attendance, I won't be there. I'm sorry, I dislike full council, so that will be great for me. I'll just attend from home. When people are at home, if their camera's off, you have no idea if they are listening to the discussion, if they are hearing the content of the topic they're about to vote on, or if they've toddled off to make a cup of tea, or if they're cooking their dinner in the other room. You have no idea. You could not have a part 2 item because you would not know who else was in the room of the person attending remotely. So if I'm at home in my kitchen, my son could wander in the kitchen to get something out of the fridge and hear something confidential. So I fail to see how you could have part 2 because there's no way you would know who else was in the room. So I am very concerned about this. I don't think the government thought it through. It's a great idea in principle, and yes, it's modern and moving forward. I just think it's a very retrograde step. We interact much better as councillors when we're here sitting opposite each other, and we can have a much better debate than you can remotely. And I, for one, I'm sorry, Ryan, I don't like the response. It would be, I'd have almost all the opposite answers, I think, but that's my view, and I think some others in my group feel that way, but thank you.
I mean, the other point you make is quite important, that we can't actually tell whether people in regulatory hearings, licensing and planning have actually listened to the full discussion. I think that is actually quite important. What it reinforces for me is that Ryan's initial take on this is right, that in principle, because the government are going to do this, but we should be arguing that we should be able to design the scheme that is in place in Maidstone. And we should have the maximum flexibility to actually do that, because you and I know they're going to do this. So we should actually have the maximum ability to design it ourselves. Councillor Jeffrey.
Yeah, I don't find myself in disagreement at all with any of the points, particularly Councillor Springett. There's one I'd just like to add, and I think might have been mentioned around digital exclusion. It does exist, and it is a form of exclusion. And if we're on one hand offering people to attend that way and not enabling it in a very fine way, then we could run into other problems. Could I suggest that the response is amended to pick up and flag up these other issues to allow government at least a chance to put some safeguards in, albeit with the caveat that we like the flexibility to do our own scheme, but that with that flexibility, I think there's got to be a de minimis around some of the issues we've raised.
Quite happy to support that. Is that members agree with that approach? And I will take you in a minute, Councillor Sand. Okay, thank you. It's general agreement. Councillor Sand.
I think I agree with mostly what everyone has said. However, I do know that there are certain times when some councillors struggle to get into this chamber for physical, emotional and other reasons, and I think that we all know who those councillors have been in the past, and we've all been around the table to know that they would have perhaps given the opportunity to actually... Yeah, and I think that there are times when we can actually go to do those things. I'm also concerned about the fact that, you know, it's almost like an emotive subject, isn't it? And I can feel that those councillors who may struggle to attend for all those different reasons, I would hope that as a council we would be sympathetic to them and not point the finger too hard, because as I say, there's been some councillors over the last 2 or 3 years who have really, be honest, shouldn't have been here and would have perhaps welcomed the opportunity to be elsewhere on those evenings. Thank you.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. I was worried for a moment that you hadn't seen me. So, okay. Were you? How do I know that? Chairman, I fundamentally think that as elected members we have a duty to meet together in person. When we stand at election time, the understanding is that's what we do. Our electorate, when they turn up here and sit there, not that they're here this evening, but sometimes we have a reasonable turnout, and especially when there's more controversial topics, and the public benches can be quite full. For them to turn up here and then be given a picture of everybody online from home would be rather remiss, wouldn't it? I think there's a balance and what we don't want to do is disenfranchise people from the opportunity of being members of the council and standing and as a council we've got to find ways of enabling people that in the sense that Tom was talking about. But I do think as a matter of principle that situation needs to be the exception, and what needs to be the norm is that there is an expectation that members will turn up and debate in committee, whether it's here or wherever, but we do it in person. And I'd really like to see that the tone of the response shifted more towards that. I think it's a little bit too embracing the opportunities that of moving down that route, and as I say, I think that needs to be the exception rather than the rule. So if this was to stay as it is at the moment in terms of the response, I will be voting against this.
In defence of the response, I suspect that from experience with government consultations, it has probably been written to try and get the maximum give out of the government, which, as you probably know, Councillor Cook, if you sort of take the view that this is a bad idea and argue against it, the government then tend to dismiss everything you say in the further comments section. So it might have been something of a tactical response. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. With a view to members of the public who indeed may well be disabled or have other inclusion issues which they are familiar are being given attention to in other areas of public life, can I ask for some specificity from members as to what proposals we actually think would suffice in this case? Members have generously acknowledged the point that was made earlier, but I don't think we've actually got to proposing a solution yet.
My view is that what we're saying, what I would like us to say, this is just my personal opinion, but I thought we had at least several expressions broadly around this, is that we understand where the government's coming from. We believe that there should be further accessibility, particularly for people with physical or visual handicaps or other reasons for not good reasons for not being able to attend. but we believe that local authorities should have a great deal of flexibility to design these for local needs, not least because the level of technology of local authorities varies substantially, as do the size of local authorities, which would also potentially have a very big impact on how one would approach this. I suspect if one was designing a scheme for Highlands and Islands Council, which is absolutely ginormous, that it might be slightly different than the scheme for the City of Westminster in terms of how you looked at remote access, because you're talking about Highlands Islands potentially travelling hundreds of miles for a meeting, whereas over dodgy roads. So what I thought we were saying was hoping that because they're going over mountains, glens in cold and icy weather, not because of anything else, but what I was hoping we'd say is to incorporate these remarks that have been made earlier about relevant safeguards, but not and argue for maximum flexibility, but not say to the government this is a terribly bad idea, because although I think it is a terribly bad idea in some ways, my feeling is that when you respond to government consultations, if you don't sound a little bit positive and engaged, they just generally bin your response.
Can I come back on that? Because I understand what you're saying. But of course, if one is talking about transparency, and this is what we as a council believe, and we do not agree with what the government are saying, don't we have a duty to actually say so, rather than, well, I completely disagree with what the government are saying, but let's go along with it to try and influence them in some way. I mean, that doesn't make an awful lot of sense to me. But I do think that in terms of if we're going to look at an option and how we can find solutions here, I think that we have the facility for hybrid meetings. I think that members should be where they are facing particular difficulties, have the opportunity to attend via the hybrid alternative. But as a matter of principle, there is an expectation that other than that, people will attend in person. I mean, we have a similar arrangement. There's a similar arrangement at KCC, which covers the whole of the county. So in terms of people driving around from Maidstone, they're coming in from Dover and all over. I mean, we're just talking about our borough here. So I think there needs to be a process through which if somebody wants to attend remotely, then we need to be accommodating. Yeah. But not sort of falling over ourselves to make it almost compulsory that people actually do attend. And I do think there is an issue, and obviously this is where the government are consulting. I do have a problem with voting being done online or through proxy. We have substitutes. If people want to talk, they can arrange for a substitute to come. The only time you can't have a substitute is full council. So I'll leave it there, Chairman. Thank you.
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. We don't need to design a scheme now, and we shouldn't be discussing what should be in our scheme. What we need to argue now is agree of what our consultation response to the government should be. My view is the government have made their mind up on this is going to happen, and I would want us to try and influence the outcome. But that's just my personal opinion. I'm going to take a couple more discussions in a minute, but first, Mr. O'Connell, did you want to come back?
So, thank you, Chairman. So I just want to say it's not exactly a detailed consultation. It's on the principle of whether remote attendance for committee members is something they should introduce or not. Yes, the consultation then asks questions about the limitations, etc. on that. But I've tried to respond to it by saying, yes, we should allow remote attendance in principle, but the details of that should be for local authorities to decide, because we will have concerns locally, and they're absolutely valid, those concerns, and we should decide what those exceptional circumstances that we would allow it to happen under are, which meet our own local circumstances, and any historic issues that we've had or any problems that we get with people, I don't know, travelling from Headcorn in the ice, for example, which we have here, you know, as a particular example of something that has happened before. So I think that what we need to do is have something which punches heavy by saying, yes, we support the principle, but let us decide it. I'm also pretty much against legislation that tries to dictate some quite complicated things centrally, and then we get it wrapped around our necks and it makes administering meetings more difficult. I don't want that. So I think we should be doing it locally. And then I think it is correct, it's absolutely right that people have raised their concerns, but we would address that in time. So what I'm saying is, in this response, unless it's in the Constitution, unless we've got a protocol published for it, we can't do it. So until we reach that point, we would then go through this, and we would absolutely involve members, obviously, in the writing agreement and approval of all of that, to make sure everybody's concerns are as addressed as they can be. I can't guarantee everyone will be happy. Experience tells me that. But we would generally address the concerns. However, in the response, I can pick up and mention the sorts of concerns that we have generally, to try to couch it a little bit more with that. So around part 2, around long-term semi-permanent use, not knowing how much somebody's actually heard of a conversation. I mean, for regulatory meetings in particular, that is a concern. How much interaction is actually able to go on between attendees and the public and others, and presenting to the public and the general expectation that there is in that kind of democratic way of being present and visible. So I can include those things in the response, that's absolutely fine, but I don't want to lose the main thrust, because as a small district council responding to a government consultation, our message just needs to be clear. We agree, but give us the power to decide exactly how we implement it. Thank you.
Anyone who hasn't spoken much already? No, in that case, I'm going to try and wrap. Dan, you haven't said anything, so might take you.
Thank you, Chairman. What about simplifying it then, and just if you remove the first 4 words, so you're changing it to restrictions on how councils wish to apply remote attendance, as long as other rules on public accessibility are met, should be set out in councils' constitutions and administered in accordance with published protocols, because then you're kind of you're removing the kind of element that there'd be free rein for councils to apply it at will, sort of thing.
I think, to be honest, we're all pretty much going in the same direction here. And Councillor Cook, and then we're going to wrap this up on the first part, then we're going to talk about proxy voting, because I think the reaction might be a bit different on that one. Right, Councillor Cook, did you?
I wanted some clarification. So, what we're discussing here, and when we get to the proxy voting, is the response to the consultation. We're not drafting any changes to the Constitution at this stage, because we can't change the Constitution until the law has been changed. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, a bit of another fascinating constitutional working group, no doubt. Microphone. Angela winced. Okay, right. On the first initial response, Brian outlined as a way forward. Does anyone wanting to go through it again? Can you turn your mic off, please?
I just wondered what the deadline was for the response, and whether there was any opportunity for it just to come back to us at all.
The deadline's the 19th of December, so we don't have another meeting scheduled before then. However, individual councillors can also respond to this consultation should they wish.
Thank you.
So Mr. O'Connell has outlined a set of a draft response. I propose that be the response on the remote voting. Is that agreed? Thank you. Sorry, I need a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Is that agreed? Thank you. Now, on proxy voting, my view is different. I think this is a nightmare. The government haven't thought about it. And what happens if someone issues a proxy and then decides to revoke it? You'd end up having a massive argument. So, and to be honest, it's not necessary, because that's what substitute members are for at committees. It would be a nightmare if you had it at regulatory committee meetings. Absolutely shocking procedural breaches could occur. So I don't think they've thought about this at all. The only time a proxy vote would be of any use would be at full council meetings rather than committee meetings anyway. So the amount of time it would help in any way would be limited. And to be honest, even at full council meetings, the propensity for misuse and confusion is very high. But that's just my take on it. Mr. O'Connell presumably has a more nuanced and even-toned take on this than me.
Not really. I don't like it. I mean, I've set out the response. You can see in the sort of text boxes the answers to question 12 in particular. Are there circumstances in which you feel proxy voting would not be appropriate? And I put all, and then just listed my reasons why. So, yeah, quite strong feelings about it, but you can see that in the papers.
As I say, nuanced and balanced. Councillor Springett first and then Councillor Goode.
Thank you. The only time I think proxy voting would be appropriate is at full council, because you can't provide a substitute. So that's the only occasion. And when you have something big like the local plan going through, where perhaps someone desperately wants to vote on it but can't for whatever reason, they're abroad so they can't attend, that would be the only exception that I would think is appropriate, would be for full council where you cannot provide a substitute. Thank you.
And then I think there could be certain arguments.
Yeah,
Moi, I have, I'm sorry it shouldn't be, a couple of things, totally agree with our officer on this. My answer is just flat no. The other thing is, please can we have a link to the government consultation? Bless their hearts, I'm sure they're doing their best. The other question I have, Chairman, is, well, actually, it's for Councillor Sams. Have you had your hand up and everybody's ignoring you? Oh, great. Oh, excellent. Thank you, Chairman, that's my lot.
I was working round the room in this order. So now, Councillor Sams, I wasn't ignoring you, I was going in order.
He wasn't ignoring me, I knew he was working around the room. So I want to just reiterate what you said is actually there's at the full council meetings over a number of years, and it could have been local plan, it could have been anything, there's councillors that have been in this chamber who shouldn't have been. They should not have been in this chamber because they are unwell and they got to the chamber and some had to be taken home at a point. And I think it's a really difficult situation, but I think this council needs to be sensitive to people's needs, and the full council meeting should have the ability to have a proxy voter, and it can be named while they're on the screen. I nominate Councillor Cook to be my proxy voter, or whoever, because I do believe that is essential for them to be able to take part in the meeting if they so wish. And we all know who those people were, and we should allow for that process to be sensitive to that. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Is anyone proposing a formal amendment to the consultation response then? Because it's pretty much a flat no at the moment. Councillor Cook.
I think I recognise the challenges with full council, and I do. But that's no different to anything that we've had over many years. And if people are ill, then they shouldn't be here. And if I could, through you, Chairman, use an example, former mayor, 2 years, God bless her, Marion. she came in, but frankly, Tom, if there was the provision for her to do that at home, she would have come in anyway, because she was such a believer in being there on behalf of the people that elected her. She would have come in irrespective. And so, whilst I acknowledge that, I'm not happy to amend the motion. I think we say, as far as proxy voting is concerned, thank you, but no thank you. Sorry.
Very few of you, perhaps none of you, will remember Sarah Haskett, who was the Conservative member for Bearsted many years ago and had been chronic ill health for about a decade, really. She came along assiduously to every council meeting she could. She'd have hated the idea of proxy voting or remote attendance. And all the while she was a councillor, that's what kept her going, being in council meetings with other councillors and the public. And it was that contact. And when very sadly, for very boundary changes, 2000, 2002, whatever it was, the Conservatives nominated 3 candidates for Bearsted, and she failed to get elected because of the popular independent. Pat Marshall took the other seat. So within a month of not being able to attend council meetings, Sarah was no more. So I think we have to bear in mind that putting in arrangements for people who are in ill health with the best of intentions of trying to help them may actually not help them. And actually the best of intentions may actually be misplaced. I had a member of my own party who was very ill recently, and there was pressure on him to step down from public life. If he had, I suspect he'd have died earlier. And it is sometimes the contact with other people that keeps people going, and sometimes at a very high level too. Marion and Sarah Haskett were as sharp as mentally as they'd ever been, whatever their physical disabilities. So we have to be careful, I think, of, actually harming people whilst thinking we're doing them good. Anyway, so Councillor Thompson.
In order to emphasise the point that Councillor Cook may wish to make my point for me, but I wish to make it for myself. Members of the public who are accustomed to making decisions for themselves about their inclusion may look askance at the argument being made in this chamber this evening. I will leave you to draw conclusions from that.
Thank you. Anyway, so we have a recommendation on the papers for our response. Absent any formal amendments to that, I put that to the vote. Those in favour of the response as written by Mr. O'Connell. Yeah, with the... we're not amending the proxy vote ones. Those against? Any abstentions? No, in that case, that consultation response is agreed. And with that, I hereby close the meeting and thank members for their participation in an interesting set of discussions. You get a range of different issues at this committee. That's what I like about it.